Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having the hearing. And this has been fascinating. I really appreciate the experts coming and talking to us about this. Let me just give you an interesting case study from Ohio, the middle of the country. Like every other state here, we're concerned about radicalization, and there are recently two cases. One is Christopher Lee Cornell, some of you know, 20-year-old, Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown, wanted to come here and bomb the Capitol. That happened earlier this year. He's now under arrest. Just last month, Abdurrahman Sheikh Mohammed of Columbus was indicted on federal charges. He actually became the first American, as I understand it, accused of training in Syria and then returning to try to conduct a terrorist attack here in the United States. So one is a classic lone wolf, right? So he's on the internet, gets radicalized, a loner. The second is a member of a community in Central Ohio, as I understand it, the Somali community. I know a number of members of that community. They're very concerned about the radicalization. They are engaged and involved in it. The leaders are working hard to have a productive dialogue about it. Some of the things you all talked about they're doing. And it's two very, very different challenges. And we've talked more about the community one, and I'd like to hear more about that if you have thoughts. But also about, the lone wolf. And maybe this goes to more what Senator Booker was talking about. I looked at your appendices, Mr. Sheikh, and unbelievable, the kinds of stuff that they are doing. And we certainly have the capability to do more with more resources. So I guess my first question would be, do you view these as two distinct challenges with two very different strategies, and just assessing the two strategies? And a sub-part of that would be a specific question I've always had. You've got three groups, DHS, NCTC, and FBI, all working together to try to support particularly these community outreach programs, understanding that, as Mr. Sheikh said, local police are the face of it, but to get these best practices and the expertise, frankly, our local communities are not going to have the access to that. Are they doing a good job coordinating, or should there be one agency that has more responsibility and therefore accountability? And I will open it up. I'd like to hear from all of you.
Training overseas makes you more dangerous. I mean, we saw in Paris that the fact that one of the perpetrators had trained with Al-Qaeda in Yemen made it a much more effective attack. So yes, they're very different, and lone wolves have a natural ceiling to what they can do because they're operating alone and they don't have an organization. They usually don't have training. So they are two separate issues. I'm glad you mentioned Senator Portman, Mr. Mohammed from Cincinnati, Ohio, because he's the only returnee who's come back to the United States who's alleged to have plotted an attack. Crucially, Columbus, pardon me, sir. Crucially, he was trained by Nusra, which we haven't really talked about today, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. So, the focus is a lot on ISIS, but the two cases of Americans coming back to the United States, one of whom didn't plot anything here, one who's alleged to, were both Nusra. So we need to keep that in mind.
This is particularly troubling and interesting because it wasn't al-Shabaab, even though, as I understand it, he came from the Somali community, and you would have thought it would have been al-Shabaab.
I think in that particular case, it was not clear in the court documents exactly who he had trained with. He'd started with Nusra, and then he went to an unspecified training camp and talked to unspecified clerics while he was posting about the Islamic State. In terms of the problems, these are two different problems. We could see ISIS try and bridge the two to coordinate loosely lone wolf type activity with organized type terrorist activity. In the case of this returnee, this may be a dry run to see what happens when you send somebody back. We have seen that ISIS has had return fighters who have been active in Europe. We've seen at least one case of what was described by investigators as an ISIS operational cell in Belgium. There's not much reason to think that they won't try this kind of thing. So we need to sort of keep an eye on this as it develops. The lone wolf piece of it is easy for them. It's easy. It's something they've proven that they're pretty good at relative to other groups. And it's going to capture a lot of headlines for them without a big investment. So the question is how much they want to invest in attacks here. And I think that's pretty unclear right now. We don't have a clear beat on that.
Mr. Sheikh, could you talk a little about the coordination between DHS and the FBI and the NCTC?
There is a DHS coordinator on CVE, on countering violence extremism, David Gersten, Gersten, comes from a civil liberties background, which I was pleasantly surprised to see that DHS is putting that kind of resource in that area. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties is also looking at how to avoid the securitization aspect of it. The securitization aspect of it is really poisonous to the CVE branding, I think, as communities, if they perceive, especially at the behest of what I call these obstructionist community groups who are really giving a false narrative of what the government is trying to do, it will continue to be a problem. If I could just quickly make a point on the lone wolf. What kind of lone wolves are we talking about? I call them ISIS zombies. These are the self-activating, might have mental health issues, really low level of competency. But then you could have, directed attackers who, let's say, are Syria returnees and do have a level of competency where, just one person can pull off a quite effective attack. In Paris, of course, only 2 guys did what they did. So you could easily have a cell of 6 people, 3 two-man teams to go and do simultaneous attacks, and would really cause some great disruption. So there are, again, a number of threats in that spectrum.
But just back to the community for a second, you were making the point that we need to do a better job of providing best practices community by community. It will be different. Local face, you said, was important, getting the community engaged and involved. And again, I said the Somali community in Central Ohio has been very involved, and I think in a productive dialogue. Is the federal government, where we have responsibility, doing an effective job of coordinating between the 3 agencies I mentioned, and perhaps even some other agencies that are more on the intelligence side? Is that working, or should there be more accountability that comes from more definitive responsibility?
It is working. I am positive, optimistic on that side. First and foremost is because there was no coordinator before. And so now that there is a coordinator and that is happening is a positive step. It's running into these issues of critics saying, this is just an excuse to intelligence gather. But I think DHS and their particular mechanisms that are working on CVE are trying to navigate this space as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Gerstein?
Thanks, Senator Portman. We'll start another round.
Thank you, Senator.